everybody. Welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me for another true crime video. Now, the way I stumbled upon this case was purely by accident because I guess it was a popular one for a while. A lot of people were talking about it on YouTube and like the podcasting world, but because I don't watch or listen to true crime anymore, since that's what I do all day, I'd never heard of it, which is why I might, want to tap back into the true crime podcasting and YouTube world just to see what's going on because I have no idea. But anyways, if you follow me on Instagram, you'll know a few weeks ago I was shooting a movie. And so, between scenes when they're setting up the lighting and stuff, you have time to talk. And so I started talking to some people on set and they were asking me if I'd heard about the case of Katie Pladl. And I said, no. And so they started explaining it to me and I listened, but I was also like, okay, guys, this can't be right. They have to be exaggerating, or maybe they're mixing up details of more than one case. This sounds absolutely bizarre. So of course, as soon as I had a moment, I grabbed my phone and I started looking into Katie Pladl's case myself, and imagine my surprise when I found out that they were right. They didn't exaggerate. They didn't confuse the details with that of another case. There were no lies detected. And I just don't understand how something like this happens. So let's talk about the case and the details, and maybe you all can help me understand what happened here, because I try to be open-minded, but I just cannot do it with this. I can't pretend that there's a world in which this kind of behavior exists and it's acceptable. When tragedy happens, we try to make sense of it. We try to find some seed of logic and reasonability in what happened so that our brains don't go into a tailspin. And in general, that's usually difficult because I know, at least I can speak for myself, most of the tragedies we talk about, in my opinion, are senseless and avoidable. But with this case, it's even more difficult to find a grain of reason. And believe me, I tried because I like to be fair. I like to put myself in people's shoes. I tried. So let's get into it. But before we dive in, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Native. I love Native. I love their products, from their body wash, which is the best body wash in the world, to their toothpaste, their lotions. But today I want to talk to you about what brought me to Native in the first place, their deodorant. I love Native deodorant because it keeps me smelling good all day with 72-hour odor protection, no matter how much I'm sweating in front of these hot lights, sweating at the gym. And I love the texture of Native deodorants. They aren't sticky, they aren't crumbly, they go on super smooth and silky, and they feel dry within seconds. The best thing is Native's deodorants do all of that while being made with ingredients that are simple and effective, like coconut oil and shea butter. Native always makes their deodorant aluminum and paraben free. The deodorants are also vegan and cruelty free, and Native makes a plastic free version of their deodorant using the same great formula inside, but with a more sustainable packaging, earth friendly, and 100% plastic free on the outside. All of that is the foundation of what makes Native deodorants the only deodorant that I've used for years. But what makes them fun for me are all the great scents that they come in. Every single deodorant I have from Native smells great, and I have a lot of their deodorants. And I love that they release special edition scents all the time. For instance, they just launched their candy shop collection right in time for Valentine's Day. And this assortment of obnoxiously craveable candy shop inspired scents helps to satisfy your sweet tooth with scents like gummy bear, sweet cinnamon hearts, sour berry belts, and strawberry and vanilla taffy. So surprisingly, I actually knew I was going to love the strawberry and vanilla taffy, and that has been my go-to deodorant for about 2 weeks now since I actually got these scents. But I didn't know how much I was going to like the sour berry belts scent, and it's really, really good. I have it in the deodorant and the body wash, and I've been honestly loving it, and I love to use them together. It doesn't smell fake. That's the thing about Native scents that I really like. They do not smell artificial. And as always, you better not forget that Native has so much more to offer. They have toothpaste, they have body wash. If you are not using their body washes, like, you're missing out big time. Okay, so 3 Native deodorants would normally be $39, but right now, if you use the link in the description box and then use code StephanieH29, you'll get them for $26. That's over 33% off. Click the link in the description box, use code StephanieH29, and get 3 Native deodorants for just $26. And with that same code, you can also get 20% off any body wash or lotion, so stock up right now. Anytime I have a 20% off of body wash discount code, I use it myself. So once again, click the link in the description box, use code StephanieH29, get 3 deodorants for just $26 and 20% off any body wash or lotion. I love Native so much, you will too, and I want to thank Native for sponsoring today's video. Let's dive in. Between April 11th and April 12th of 2018, 42-year-old Stephen Pladl murdered his 20-year-old daughter, Katie. He also murdered Katie's adopted father, 56-year-old Anthony Fusco, and Katie's 7-month-old son, Bennett. On April 12th, 72-year-old Grace Pladl called the Cary Police Department in North Carolina and told them she had just received a disturbing call from her son, Stephen, confessing to these crimes, and she wanted police to go to Stephen's home in Knightdale, North Carolina, and check on the welfare of 7-month-old Bennett.
Yes. My son just called me, and he told me oh my God, in North Carolina, he killed his baby, and he's in the house.
Okay, you said that he told you he killed his baby? Okay, ma'am, listen to me. What's your name? Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
He's not home. His wife broke up with him over the phone yesterday, and he told me, she's in New York, and he told me he was on his way. He called me last night and said he's on his way. He's going to bring the baby to her, and then he was coming back. And he just
okay.
He said he killed his wife, he killed her father, and I can't even believe this is happening.
Okay, so you're probably confused because you can clearly hear in this 911 call, Grace Pladl said that her son Stephen killed his baby, his wife, and his wife's father. But I told you that Stephen had killed his daughter, her adopted father, and her son. And both of those things can't be true at the same time, right? You can't believe what I'm telling you and what you hear Grace Pladl telling the 911 operator, right? One of us must be wrong. Me or Grace, one of us must be wrong. No, not in this situation. I am right when I say that Stephen killed his daughter, and Grace is right when she said Stephen killed his wife, because they are one in the same. Katie Pladl was Stephen Pladl's biological daughter, and when she was 20 years old, she became his wife. And then they had a child together, a son that they named Bennett. Now, there's a lot going on here, so as always, to understand what happened at the end, we have to go back to the beginning. In 1995, when Stephen Pladl was 20 years old, he met 15-year-old Alyssa Garcia in an internet chat room. They began chatting, they fell in love, and they wanted to be together in real life. So Alyssa ran away from her home and her family in San Antonio, Texas, to live with Stephen in New York. And let's be honest here for a second, okay? Alyssa, 15-year-old Alyssa, she didn't fall in love. She was a child, and she was manipulated and groomed by an adult man. Stephen Pladl was 20 at the time. Now, I'm sure in that moment, Alyssa felt like she was in love, but that isn't love. And once Stephen had Alyssa isolated and estranged from her family and living across the country in a place where she knew no one but him, the red flags started waving mightily. Alyssa soon became pregnant, and on January 29, 1998, when she was just 17 years old, Alyssa gave birth to a daughter that she named Denise. Stephen and Alyssa put their daughter Denise up for adoption when she was just 8 months old, and the baby was adopted by Anthony Fusco, an officer with the New York State Department of Corrections, and his wife Kelly, who was a secretary for the town of Dover, New York's Land Use Department. Now, the Fuscos changed Denise's name to Katie, and along with their biological daughter, Tony and Kelly Fusco raised Katie in a trailer park off of Route 22 in Dover, New York, a small town about 80 miles north of New York City. Now, the fact that Katie was adopted is less important than the reason of why she was put up for adoption. Katie's biological mother, 17-year-old Alyssa, claims that she'd come to the conclusion that the only way to protect her daughter was to give her up. Now, it was true that, like a lot of young mothers, Alyssa was, broke. She didn't have a lot of money coming in. It was hard for her to raise and support a child. But Alyssa also claimed that her boyfriend and the father of her child, Stephen Pladl, was abusing little baby Katie. Alyssa said that Stephen didn't bond with Katie. He never took care of her. He rarely held her, and he would constantly scream at her, especially when she cried, which, for anybody who's had a newborn baby knows that happens quite a bit. It happens more often than not in the first few months of, a baby's life. And honestly, can we blame them, right? They were all warm and cozy and protected for almost an entire year. They were so happy in there. Nobody was bothering them. They were never cold. They were never hungry. And then all of a sudden they're boom, out in this world where people are mean and it's cold and, you don't always get fed when you're hungry. And sometimes you cry and you're like, I'm hungry, and people don't understand what that means because you're speaking baby and they speak adult. So yeah, it's understandable why babies cry so much. But apparently Stephen Pladl just, he couldn't take it. He couldn't stand it. Katie, or Denise's mother, Alyssa, said, quote, he would do things like cover her mouth when she would cry. He pinched her all over her body and turned her black and blue a couple of times. Eventually, he said he couldn't stand the screaming and crying anymore, so he started placing her into a cooler or an ice chest. Sometimes he would put a blanket in there to keep a crack open. Sometimes he would shut it and wouldn't let me go back to open it. He would make me wait a few minutes until I could go back, and I'd open the cooler, and she would just be gasping for air, drenched in sweat, bruises on her. I would just scoop her up and shut the bedroom door so he couldn't bother me, and I would rock her back and forth and tell her how sorry I was for the life she was having. End quote. Okay, so messed up, man. I do understand that the cries of a baby can be discordant to a lot of people, can be, like a horrible feeling. It makes you feel really stressed out. It's supposed to. It's a biological thing. When a baby cries, you're supposed to feel stressed out because you're supposed to, then attend to that baby's needs so they stop crying. That's the biological instinct in us to make sure the human race continues on. And I understand that some people, it gets to be too much. And I totally endorse and condone putting a baby safely in her crib, closing the door to her room, and going into another room, and let the baby cry for a little bit. It's what you got to do so that you don't hurt the baby, then that's what you got to do. It's much better than the alternative, which is apparently putting the baby in a cooler or an ice chest. Why? See, there's no reason to do that, right? Because Stephen Pladl could have put his child into a different room, left the room, went outside into the garage, whatever, and just took a couple minutes and calmed down. The fact that he put his child, if this is true, which I think it is, the fact that he put his child into a cooler and then closed her in, that's not because she was crying and he didn't want to hear her. That's because he was a psychopath and he wanted to torture this child. But that's just my opinion. So Alyssa, at that time, she's young. Her family wasn't speaking to her because she left, and didn't tell them where she was going. And she didn't have anyone on her side in New York where she and Stephen were living. She said she was too frightened and confused to tell anyone about the abuse, but she knew that she had to get her baby out of that situation. And listen, I completely get it, right? When you're 17 and you've been isolated from the people who care about you and you have no one, you might definitely feel powerless. And I give Alyssa a lot of credit, a ton of credit, because she had to make what I'm sure felt like an impossible decision to let go of her child in order to protect her child. What I don't really understand is what happened next. Alyssa stayed in a relationship with Stephen Pladl. They got married in 2006. They moved from New York to Henrico, which is a suburb of Richmond, Virginia, and then they had 2 more daughters. I don't get that, okay? I don't get that. Why would you ever have another child with a man who is so abusive, so violent, and so disgusting to your first child that he almost killed her, and he probably would have killed her if Katie had stayed in his care? And it's not like Stephen got better. It's not like he changed his ways or turned his life around. That wouldn't matter to me, but maybe it would matter to some people. But that's not what happened here. It actually seemed like Stephen, got worse. Alyssa said for a little while she thought he was getting better because he didn't treat their daughters in the same way that he had treated Katie when she was a baby, but Stephen was still violent, angry, temperamental, and unpredictable. Alyssa and Stephen's life together was marked by his worsening temper and his inability to keep a job, which meant Alyssa had to work several jobs at once to keep them afloat. Stephen would have random violent outbursts where he would throw furniture, punch walls, and just spend hours walking around raging and just yelling at everyone. And Alyssa said, quote, "I was always on eggshells. Whatever his mood was, everybody knew, and that mood was often not happy. A lot of yelling, a lot of things smashed in the house in front of our kids," end quote. And for anyone who's ever had to live with somebody like this, how much that sucks, how traumatic it is, how it will literally change you, okay? It will turn you into this quiet and feeble and just very scared person when you live with somebody who has unpredictable moods, and when they're in a bad mood, it. Everybody knows it. You can feel it. It's tense. Everyone's stressed out. You don't feel like you can live. You don't feel like you can feel joy or happiness or be too loud. You want to make yourself as small as possible. You want to take up as little amount of room as possible, and you just don't want to draw attention to yourself. It is very stressful. So I do understand that. But once again, why did you stay with him? It does not seem that anybody has anything redeemable to say about Stephen Pladl. And yet so many people just end up going along with what he wants, even though the things he wants are bananas. You'll see what I mean. Not only was Stephen violent and angry and unpredictable and basically tortured everybody around him, but he was very fond of guns. That's a great combination. He owned at least 4 or 5 of them. And, and there's another story. Alyssa told a story about what happened one day when a neighbor's cat wandered into their garage. She said, quote, "He literally beat it to death with his own hands and maybe some tools, wrapped it up in a trash bag, and put it into the garbage, just because he didn't like cats," end quote. That's not why he did it. That is not why he did that, okay? Lots of people don't like cats. I'm not really a big fan of cats. Very few people who don't like cats are out there beating them to death with their bare hands and maybe some tools. I'm pretty sure hurting small animals is a symptom of something else besides not being a huge cat fan. Although Alyssa said that Stephen didn't treat his 2 youngest daughters, the daughters they had after Katie was adopted, he didn't treat them as badly as he had treated baby Katie, it still doesn't seem like he was father of the year. Alyssa told a story of one day when one of their daughters wet herself. She was just 3 years old. And this, oh my God, this is such a hard story to tell. So when this happened, I guess Alyssa was at work, and Stephen Pladl verbally berated this young girl, just 3 years old, verbally berated her for wetting herself before making her stand in the bathtub while still covered in urine and wearing her urine-soaked clothes. And this little girl had to do that for hours until her mother got home from work to clean her up. Alyssa said that when she got home from work that day, she found her 3-year-old daughter shaking in the bathtub. And when she saw her mother, the little girl asked in a small and terrified voice, "Can I please come out now, Mommy?" Alyssa said, quote, "He didn't care that she was up there crying by herself, 3 years old, trembling in a bathroom covered in urine," end quote. Yep, no shit he didn't care about that. You said that when Katie was a little baby, like under a year old, he pinched her until she was bruised, covered her mouth with his hand, screamed in her face when she cried like babies do, and put her in a freaking ice chest, okay? Why are you surprised that he doesn't care that your 3-year-old daughter feels demoralized and completely devastated and shamed and had to sit in a bathroom for hours with urine-soaked clothes on? Why would he care about that when this is the person who did this to your first child and then you married him and had 2 more kids with him? I'm sorry, I feel like I'm being judgy, but Jesus. And listen, I know what you're going to say, or I know what some of you are going to say. Oh, she was in an abusive relationship and, she didn't know what to do and she had nowhere else to go. Keep in mind what I said. Stephen Pladl could not hold down a job. And Alyssa was the only breadwinner, and she worked like full time while he stayed home unemployed. A lot of the times in these like abusive, toxic dynamics where the women don't leave when they or their children are being abused by their partner, it's because they have nothing, right? They aren't even allowed to have a bank account. They don't make their own money. They wouldn't know what to do. In this situation, she's already like making her own money. She's already doing everything, paying all the bills. Why is she with this man? Why? Why? And Alyssa also told another story of how I believe it was her oldest daughter who had some special needs issues, and she said Stephen would always call this young girl, who's his daughter, the R word to her face all the time. The R word. He would call her that and say she was stupid and stuff like that. Like, why are you with this person? How? Like, it's your job, like, to protect your children from this kind of shit. You wouldn't let a stranger do this kind of shit to your kids. Why would you let their father do it when you know that is so much more detrimental? I'm sorry. I have a really hard time with it. But hundreds of miles away in Dover, New York, Katie Fusco was living a normal and happy life, far away from the chaos of the Pladl family. Katie was a vegetarian. She loved all animals, but she had a special place in her heart for stray cats who she would take in and care for, which, is like the exact opposite of her biological father, Stephen Pladl, who apparently beat cats to death with his bare hands. Wow. And from a very young age, Katie had loved drawing, and she wanted to be an artist. She once wrote in a blog post, quote, "A pen and something to draw on became a safe place for me. Ink became my weapon against rules and regulations. There wouldn't be a corner in a classroom or park that didn't have a secret little character living on it. Ask an artist why creating is important to them, and they won't ever stop giving out reasons. To be short, for me, a life without art is no life at all." End quote. And I mean, simply from that quote and from, other stuff that she wrote that I read, Katie Pladl, or Katie Fusco at this time, seemed to be a very self-aware, sensitive, intelligent individual. At Dover High School, she was known for the comic strips she drew. They were so good. She fought for women's rights, and after graduation, she was planning to attend Dutchess Community College and then go on to SUNY Purchase in New York City, where she would pursue a career in digital advertising. But then, I don't know what happened. I have no idea what happened, but something happened that put those plans on hold indefinitely. Although Katie loved her adopted parents, she had a desire to know who her biological parents were, as many people who are adopted feel the need to do once they get older. They want to know about a little bit more about themselves. And I just talked to somebody, an older man who was adopted, and he said, it's crazy because it has nothing to do with how you feel about your adopted parents, but I always felt like there were things about me that I never understood and I didn't have explained to me. And usually you would look to your family members, your parents, to see if those same things are in them and hopefully help you understand, and it connects you to them. But I couldn't find that in my adopted parents. I couldn't see that in my adopted parents. So I sought out my biological mother. And all of a sudden, when we met, all of those things clicked into place and I understood myself so much better. So I get it. I completely get it that Katie would want to do that. So many people do want to do that. And she was able to finally track down her biological parents, which were Stephen and Alyssa Pladl, in August of 2015. They began communicating, talking about each other's lives, catching up, etc. And then after turning 18 in January of 2016 and graduating from high school in June of 2016, Katie actually met Stephen and Alyssa Pladl in person after graduation in June. And by August of 2016, she had made the decision to move in with her biological parents and her two younger sisters, who I believe were aged 8 and 12 at the time. Or they were 7 and 11. But either way, that was the average or the rough estimate of their ages at that time. So she's got two little sisters, full biological sisters. So instead of going to college as planned, Katie made this huge life-altering decision to leave New York, leave her, family that she'd known and grown up with all her life, and move in with basically four strangers, right? If you count the little girls, 4 strangers in Virginia, like across the country. I guess not across the country, but still, New York to Virginia. Same coast, but still. It's like a huge decision for a young person to make. It's like a huge, big decision for a young person to make. And I don't understand why she did it. And it almost makes me wonder if there was something going on between Katie and Stephen far before she moved in, while they were chatting online. Katie's adopted parents, Tony and Kelly Fusco, they were obviously, concerned and sad. And they also were worried that she wasn't going to go to college, but they thought Katie was old enough to make her own decisions and they wanted to support her. And I mean, that was their first mistake, honestly, thinking that turning 18 immediately means you're an adult and you can make good decisions and stuff. I mean, you are an adult, right, in the eyes of the law, but you aren't an adult inside your head and heart. I was 18 once. And I made the dumbest decisions. 85 to 90% of my decisions made at the age of 18 were so dumb. I could say that now and understand that that's a process I had to go through, but I think that, what happened here is the Fuscos were this is a delicate situation. We're her adopted parents. We already decided we never wanted to keep her from her biological parents. That's why we never hid from her that she was adopted. So we need her to pursue her path. We need her to go on this journey and then, decide what she wants to do so that we don't feel like we're keeping her with us against her will or we're guilting her into being here. So I completely get it. But once again, that's a huge decision, a huge life-altering decision. So Alyssa Pladl claims that when Katie came to live with them, Alyssa and Stephen, were already having severe marital problems, and they were already sleeping in separate rooms. However, Alyssa was really happy to be able to reconnect with her firstborn daughter and to have the chance to, live with Katie and see her every morning and every night as she felt it always should have been. But 18-year-old Katie seemed to develop a closer bond with her father, Stephen, right away. And the two would spend all day hanging out at home together while Alyssa worked at her job as a T-Mobile supervisor. Stephen was unemployed, of course, so he had time to hang out and really develop a close relationship with his long-lost biological daughter. At first, Alyssa didn't think anything of it. Katie was Stephen's daughter. They should be close, of course. But Stephen also began to change after Katie moved in. He didn't get a job or become a contributing member of the household. No. Not that kind of change. Stephen shaved his beard, and then he grew his hair longer, and he started wearing different kinds of clothing, tight-fitting shirts and skinny jeans. So in this picture, you can see this is clearly when Katie first met Stephen and Alyssa, and you can see that Stephen looks like kind of, more of like a dad. He's got a beard, his hair is shorter. He even looks more his age, like in the face. And then in this picture, he looks way different because he's grown his hair out, he shaved his beard. I think he did it in an attempt to look younger, closer to Katie's age because she was 18. Most men, when they go through a midlife crisis, they buy a sports car or get hair plugs or something, but not Stephen Pladl. He just develops a crush on his 18-year-old daughter. And then about 6 weeks after Katie had moved in, Alyssa noticed that her husband Stephen had started sleeping on the floor of Katie's room, and she thought that it was odd. Alyssa claims she told her oldest daughter, Katie, what's going on with you and Dad? Why is he sleeping in your room? I just want to let you know that the reason you were put up for adoption in the first place was because of the abuse that you suffered when you were a baby at the hands of your father, Stephen. Just be careful, But Alyssa said Katie didn't seem fazed. It didn't seem to bother her, this revelation. I wonder if Alyssa told Katie the cat in the garage story, because I feel like that may have made an impact. And I mean, honestly, it kind of makes sense that Katie not necessarily wouldn't care, but maybe wouldn't believe Alyssa, right? Because who knows what Stephen was telling Katie behind the scenes while they hung out watching Judge Judy all day. What was he whispering to her in the night from the floor of her bedroom? He could have been telling her, listen, Alyssa is a horrible person. She's horrible to me. Everything she says is a lie. Actually, she might tell you that it's because of me that we put you up for adoption, but she's a liar. She's a liar because it's her fault that you weren't able to stay with us. She was the abusive one, and she was mean to me. She's still mean to me. She doesn't appreciate me. She makes me feel less than. She's cheating on me, etc., etc. Stephen could have been telling Katie all sorts of stuff, and because he had developed the stronger bond and he was spending more time with her, she may have tended to believe him. Now, Alyssa does believe that Stephen brainwashed Katie and began grooming her in the same way that he had done to Alyssa when she was just a 15-year-old young girl in that internet chat room. So Alyssa confronted Stephen about sleeping in Katie's room, and apparently he snapped and he screamed at Alyssa and he said, "It's none of your business," and then he took Katie and they stormed out of the house. Finally, just a few months after Katie moved in, Alyssa and her two youngest daughters moved out of the house. This happened in November of 2016, and finally, she filed for divorce, and divorce proceedings began. Now, Katie elected to stay at the house with her father, and since Alyssa and Stephen shared custody of the two younger girls, Katie's younger sisters, they would go back to the house for days or weekend visits with their father and their older sister. Now, this went on for a few months until one day at the end of May 2017, when Alyssa picked up her middle daughter's journal and began reading. And what she read in the journal made her feel sick and angry and confused all at the same time. The 11-year-old girl wrote in confusion that her father was instructing her and her younger sister to refer to Katie, their older sister, his oldest daughter, as their stepmother. And apparently Katie was pregnant, and Stephen was telling the girls that Katie's baby was also his baby. What? So when Alyssa read this, she immediately called her ex-husband and she confronted him. Alyssa said, quote, "I called him and I said, so there was something in this journal that I should be concerned about. I said, is Katie pregnant with your baby? He said, I thought you already knew." I just tore into him. I was screaming. I said, "Is this why you've been trying to rush our divorce? Are you trying to marry her?" And he said, yes. He said the mother knew. He said Katie's adoptive parents knew, that they didn't like it at first, but they've all come to accept it. End quote. So the next call Alyssa made was to the Henrico County Police, which honestly she should have done a long time ago. Alyssa read that journal entry on May 23rd, 2017. And on May 31st, the police had opened an investigation and they were interviewing the two youngest Pladl girls. Katie's little sisters said that their father and their sister Katie slept in the same bed, and that their father Stephen had insisted that the child Katie was carrying was his child, and they needed to stop seeing Katie as their older sister and instead see her as their stepmother. But they also needed to keep this relationship a secret, or else their friends would make fun of them. Yeah, that's all that'll happen. It's not illegal or anything. That's not why you want them to keep it a secret, not at all. Now, at that time, no arrests were made, but shortly after the investigation began, Stephen and Katie left Henrico, Virginia, and moved into a house in Knightdale, North Carolina, where they openly began living as a couple. On July 20th, 2017, 2 months after Alyssa and Stephen's divorce was finalized, Stephen married his daughter, Katie, in a beautiful lakeside ceremony in Parkton, Maryland. Here are some things that are mind-blowing about this. 1. Stephen Pladl was Katie's biological father. I mean, I know I already said that, but I'm going to repeat it. Just let it sink in. Stephen was Katie's biological father, but they lied on their application, and they said they weren't related. And I have a confession to make. I always thought that the question, on the application for a marriage certificate, the question that says, like, are you related to the person you're going to get married to, I always thought, like, that's ridiculous. That's a funny question to ask, because I was like, why would anyone knowingly marry a blood relative? Like, objectively, that seems like a bad idea and gross and toxic and completely backwards. But apparently, the question does exist for people like Stephen Pladl, who, aren't even going to answer honestly anyways, right? Because it's illegal. Like, incest, marrying your daughter is illegal in all states, all 50 states. So why would anybody answer that question honestly? But whatever. It's crazy. It's crazy to me. Here's another mind-blowing fact about this wedding. Not only was Stephen's mother, Grace, in attendance, and remember, this wedding means that Katie would become Grace's daughter-in-law, but she was already Grace's granddaughter. So now Katie Pladl is Grace's granddaughter and daughter-in-law, so that's not weird. But not only was Grace there, also, Katie's adoptive parents, Tony and Kelly Fusco, were in attendance. And there's pictures from this wedding where Katie is smiling for the camera. She's wearing a short black dress. She's standing next to her new husband/father. She's pregnant, heavily pregnant. And the parents who raised her are standing there as well, smiling at the camera. All one big, happy, twisted backwards family. And before you ask, let me answer yes. Yes, they knew. They knew that Katie was marrying her biological father. There was no confusion about that, They hadn't been misled. They didn't think that Stephen was some just random, handsome, older stranger that Katie had met while living in Virginia. They knew. They knew that Stephen Pladl was Katie's biological father. Okay, why would they do that? Why? Right? Why? So Kelly Fusco, who was Katie's adopted mother, her brother claimed that the Fuscos realized there was nothing they could do. And so they ultimately decided to support Katie's decision. But there was something they could have done, right? Considering that incest is illegal, like I said, in all 50 states, and considering that this marriage would have been seen in the eyes of the law as illegal and punishable, like punishable by time in prison, Like, the Fuscos could have gone to the police, Yeah, Katie might have been mad at them for a little bit, but at least she wouldn't have been married to her father. And I think when we're weighing the pros and cons, that's better. More pros for not marrying your father than cons. And I also, like I said, I try to put myself in their shoes. I try to put myself in their position. It's getting harder and harder as we go through this. But, at this time, by the time this wedding happened, Katie was already heavily pregnant with Stephen's child, so maybe the Fuscos felt like the whole situation was already too far gone to go back. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me why anyone who isn't completely depraved would accept or support a 20-year-old woman marrying her 42-year-old biological father. I don't know why I said the ages as if that matters, I mean, like, it does make it worse that he's so much older than her, but he would be, right? Because he's her father. So, like, the ages don't really matter. They do, but, like, still, it doesn't really matter what age you are. Marrying your biological father and having his baby is, it's not good, no matter what age, It's one of those things that it's like, it's an ageless thing. Doesn't matter. Katie Pladl gave birth to her son, Bennett Pladl, on September 1st, 2017. Do you think, like, technically Bennett would also be her brother as well as her son? Like, would it work that way? I don't know. That just kind of popped into my head. But let me know what you think in the comments about that question. By November 29th, the Henrico County Police had issued arrest warrants for both Stephen and Katie. On January 27th, 2018, both Stephen and Katie were arrested and charged with incest, adultery, and contributing to delinquency. Their child, Bennett, was placed in the custody of Stephen's 72-year-old mother, Grace Pladl. Stephen's lawyer, Rick Friedman III, told the media that this was all being blown out of proportion, and there were no allegations of Stephen pressuring his daughter into a relationship or into a marriage. Friedman said, quote, "This case is an 18-year-old girl who shows up at the doorstep of a 40-year-old man who's going through difficult times with his wife. They have a bond because they are biologically related, but they never knew each other before they had a sexual relationship. He was head over heels in love with her, so much so that he outweighed the issue of them being biologically related." End quote. So let's go over that quickly. The outright statement that being in love with Katie outweighed the issue of them being biologically related. First of all, saying that Stephen and Katie Pladl are biologically related is like saying that outer space is really big. It's an understatement. Stephen was Katie's biological father. With that in mind, I also like how the lawyer says the issue of them being father and daughter. The issue. That's not an issue, okay? That's a fact. A cold, hard fact. An issue is like, two people want to get married, but they live in different states, and long-distance relationships are hard, so it's an issue. Or like two people want to get married, and one person's family isn't supportive of it, and the families threaten not to come to the wedding if they go through with it. That's an issue. An issue is a problem that can be worked on and worked through. Being father and daughter is not an issue. It's an unchangeable, unworkable, cold, hard fact that should immediately exclude even a glimmer of a thought of sexual attraction and or marriage. There's no solving this problem. There's no getting through it, okay? I mean, it's blowing my mind. You look at these pictures of Katie and Stephen Pladl. They look alike. They're clearly parent and child. It's beyond the realm of what my mind is capable of grasping. And listen, I think it's weird. It's weird that Rick Friedman, the lawyer, made this statement and tried to like minimize how bizarre this is, how wrong it is. But there was like a GoFundMe set up, and it was like, get Katie Pladl out of jail. All that happened was two consensual adults who were head over heels in love marrying each other. And because of that, the state put her in prison and took away her child. And then I was like, this can't be real, right? Like, people in the comments under this, and there are people who supported this GoFundMe. There's people who donated money to it. I said, people in the comments are going to be tearing them apart. But no, I mean, maybe they erased the comments of people tearing them apart, but the comments were like, this is a crime, not Katie and Stephen being married and having a child. That wasn't a crime. It was a crime that the police interfered with it. And they were like, what is this country coming to? Like, when you can't marry another adult in a consensual, like, loving relationship. This is, I hate it here. I hate it here. Now, that being said, now that you know my stance on it, which is like black and white pretty much, like, I don't think that any blood-related relatives should ever be marrying each other, having sex, and having children. Okay, that's my stance on it. You're not moving me on it. Let me tell you what the experts say. We are going to talk about two things, two concepts, two theories: the Westermark effect and genetic sexual attraction. So the Westermark effect, which is also known as reverse sexual imprinting, is a psychological hypothesis that states people raised together from a very early age become desensitized to each other. Therefore, they do not develop an attraction to each other. So basically, proximity to other humans during childhood, especially early childhood, like from birth to 6 years old, is a cue of biological relatedness, which tells us that this is not a person we should be procreating with. Now, you would think that this would also mean that people might tend to avoid mating with others who resemble them physically. And in studies, women did rate faces that resembled their own as lower on an attractiveness scale. However, men rated faces that resembled their own as higher on a scale of attractiveness. So that's weird, right? I wonder why. And there are hypotheses and theories about why that is, but that's not what this video is about, so we're not going to go into it right now. There have been other studies to support this Westermarck effect. For example, they studied children who weren't related by blood, but who were raised together in large peer groups, in certain cultures where, it takes a village and these kids are raised together very closely. And they found out that members of those groups rarely developed sexual relationships with each other. And I think any one of us who has siblings can say, we get this, right? I can objectively say that I believe my older brother is a very handsome man because, he is. But the thought of being attracted to him makes me want to pour burning hot lava into my eyes and brain and never, ever breathe air again. Okay? It's repulsive. He's not repulsive, but you get what I mean, right? And I think that most of us who have brothers or sisters can relate to that, I hope. So that brings us to genetic sexual attraction, a rare phenomenon of intense attraction between biological family members that can occur after a long period of separation. According to cumbria.gov.uk, quote, some people believe genetic attraction to be a delayed byproduct of missed bonding. Some birth family members report the need to touch and smell each other, just as mothers and babies do after birth, and infant brothers and sisters do in play. This need is artificially interrupted by adoption and then resurrected years later upon reunion. What some adopted people and their natural relatives lack is a shared experience of childhood to provide a common frame of reference for their feelings. Bringing up a child from birth to adulthood or being reared with other siblings by one parent allows us to safely label our emotions within the context of the family. The danger occurs when blood relatives meet as adults without that shared experience and then try to reconstitute the family relationships without being able to put a familiar label on their emotions, end quote. So, keep in mind, these are just theories. The Westermarck theory, the Westermarck effect, and this genetic sexual attraction. These are theories. They're not proven. There are people in the scientific community who support them, who believe them, and there's people in the scientific community who say that they're all nonsense, both. So in theory, I will say, I kind of get it, but these theories, they don't answer every question, and they completely remove personal choice. Like, for instance, back in the day, it was common for older children to be sent to boarding school, or male children would go off to the military, or they would study abroad. So a lot of the times, siblings weren't raised in close proximity to each other. They weren't. It's so stupid. I feel so stupid. But look at Bridgerton. Okay, look at Bridgerton as an example. If you haven't watched Bridgerton, you don't need to read the books if you want to know about the story. But let's look at Bridgerton. We have I forget, 5 kids in the family, and the youngest is, I think, 11 or so, or maybe even younger, and then the oldest is 30, all right? So don't tell me that the 30-year-old son was raised in close proximity to the 9 or 10-year-old daughter. He was probably long gone out of the house, already at school, studying abroad, because they were an English nobility family, before she was even born, or while she was going through that very, formative time, 1 through 6, where you would get used to being around your brothers and sisters, and that's why you wouldn't develop a sexual attraction to them. So that situation happened all the time. My own brother is 10 years older than me, and he went to the Marines when I was very young. So we weren't raised together that much. And still, I'm promising you that I'm not going to run off and get married to him. We would see a lot more of that running off and getting married to each other if that was the only thing preventing blood relatives from developing like sexual attractions to each other. I always felt there was something like hormonally, biologically, like almost a smell that you could like sense this person is like my blood relative. And so I should probably not like be, getting naked with them. I always felt it was something like that. But I think there's probably a lot of factors that prevent you from, falling in love with your brother and wanting to have sex with him. Basically, that's why it's so highly looked down upon in like most cultures all around the world. It's just weird. It's weird. It's wrong. It shouldn't happen. And it's not good for, like procreation. That's where you get like things like inbreeding and genetic deformities and things like that. Like we don't want it. We don't want it. Furthermore, the concept of something being wrong, that's still in your brain, no matter what your emotions or your hormones or your heart is telling you, right? For instance, I'll use this as an example. A woman could be married to a man, but then maybe she meets another man and she's like insanely attracted to this man. She can't even think or focus when he's around. She's compelled to be near him. She wants to touch him. She is just like super attracted to him. This probably happens all the time. Yet, most people, many people, I think, still, they acknowledge these feelings. They say like, oh yes, I realize and accept that I'm having these strong, intense feelings, but they still have the capacity to say, yet I know this is wrong. I'm married. I accept that I'm fiercely attracted to this other person, but I also accept that it's wrong to act on these feelings, and I love my husband and I don't want to ruin my family, so I'm not going to act on this intense attraction, and I'm actually going to do things that prevent me from being tempted, right? I'm going to make an effort to not see this person. I'm going to make an effort to not be alone with this person, etc. So we can maybe acknowledge that genetic sexual attraction could be a thing, but it doesn't completely neutralize your free will or your sense of right and wrong. Like, at the end of the day, it's a decision that you made to knowingly do something that's morally wrong or legally wrong, or in this case, both morally and legally wrong. Like, you had the choice. And so oftentimes people who use this genetic sexual attraction as like a defense for what they're doing, like, it's not a defense. It's not. Okay, that's all. Stephen Pladl gets no passes from me. There's no excuses or justifications, because before he acted on his desires, he had the ability to take a different path. He could have gotten Katie out of his house. He could have gone to therapy, done both of those things probably is what the best course of action was. But instead, he impregnated and then married his own child. Let that sink in. After being arrested and charged, Stephen and Katie both got out on bail, but there was a court order preventing them from seeing each other. So Katie returned to live with her adopted parents in New York. And from the time of his release on February 20th, Stephen lived out of a hotel room in Virginia because he was barred from returning to North Carolina. However, on March 16th, Henrico County Judge Stuart Williams lifted that restriction and basically said, like, we want you out of Virginia while you're like waiting for your trial, I guess, which doesn't make any sense, but okay. He was like, get out of Virginia, go back to North Carolina. Like, we don't want you here. And that meant that Stephen could return to his house in Knightdale, North Carolina, which happened to be like right around the area that his mother, Grace, lived. And remember, at that time, Grace was in the custody of Bennett, who is Stephen and Katie's 7-month-old son. And there was no restrictions preventing Stephen from seeing his son. There were restrictions preventing Stephen and Katie from seeing each other, but no restrictions that prevented Stephen from seeing Bennett. There weren't even any restrictions preventing Stephen from taking his son out of Grace's house, which is what he did on the evening of April 11th, 2018. At around 7 p.m., Stephen called his mother and said he was on his way to her place to pick up Bennett. And he told Grace that he and Bennett were going to drive to New York to see Katie, and then he was going to leave Bennett with Katie. But that's not what Stephen did, because earlier that night, Stephen had gotten a call from Katie. And in this call, Katie said, it's over. I don't want to be married to you anymore. Like, this isn't going to work. And apparently that caused Stephen to snap. So Stephen Pladl brought Bennett back to the house in Knightdale, North Carolina, and he killed him. They don't really outright say how Bennett died, but there are suggestions, and basically they allude to the fact that he was shot. First responders would later find the little boy's body stuffed into a closet in that house. After taking the life of his 7-month-old son, Stephen Pladl drove all night, over 600 miles from North Carolina to New York, where he parked his minivan at a liquor store across the street from the home of Tony and Kelly Fusco. Stephen then waited there until he saw Tony and Katie leave the house. It was Thursday, April 12th, and every Tuesday and Thursday, Tony would drive Katie to Waterbury, Connecticut, where Katie's adopted grandmother lived, because Katie had a job cleaning her grandmother's house twice a week. So Stephen must have known this, which is why he waited outside the house. He waited for them to leave, and then he followed Tony Fusco's truck as it headed that way into Connecticut. And when Tony pulled up to a stop sign in New Milford, Connecticut, Stephen Pladl pulled up alongside the truck and opened fire. He then drove away. Inside the truck, police found the bodies of 20-year-old Katie Pladl and 56-year-old Anthony Fusco, her adopted father. Both had been shot multiple times to their heads and torsos with an AR-15 style weapon, and Stephen Pladl was later found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in his minivan across the state line in Dover, just 5 miles from the violent scene in New Milford, Connecticut. Stephen had called his mother Grace at 8:45 a.m. to tell her what he had done, and when police found his vehicle at 9:15 a.m., he was already gone. Everyone was stunned. It was common knowledge that Stephen Pladl had engaged in incest. He had married his own daughter, and that was messed up, admittedly, but no one had really thought he would be capable of doing this. Shannon Taylor, the Commonwealth attorney for Henrico County, she said there was nothing in Stephen's background or history that would have suggested he was capable of embarking on a murderous rampage. And she said, quote, "When you look at the facts of this case, we did not see any risk factors. A recommendation from the pretrial officer said there did not appear to be any red flags," end quote. And we're not going to go over all the finger pointing, but of course, all the time, it's a tale as old as time. Whenever something like this happens, especially when a child is killed, everyone starts pointing fingers at each other and plays the blame game. Like, it wasn't us. The pretrial officer said this, and, it wasn't us. The judge made this decision, and it wasn't us. CPS made the decision to put Bennett with his grandmother, Grace. Knightdale Police Chief Lawrence Capps said, quote, "We are heartbroken and saddened over the death of this child, and like you, we are trying to make sense of all the factors that led up to this senseless taking of life," end quote. And Stephen's own attorney, Rick Friedman, told WNCN TV, quote, "This is a terrible tragedy that nobody foresaw. I really believe that if the judges or the prosecutor or the defense attorneys in this case had any clue that the minor child or anyone would be harmed, there would not be a bond set for any of the parties," end quote. And, to be fair, I don't see why they would have thought that that Stephen Pladl would do this. This is not understandable why he would do this. It just isn't. We can look at it and theorize now, hindsight, he clearly had an intense, or intense emotions and feelings for Katie. Stephen Pladl definitely wasn't right, and he probably developed this really unhealthy, toxic, controlling, possessive bond towards her. And the thought of losing her, he was like, well, I'll have nothing then. I don't know. Once again, in hindsight, we can try to theorize why he would do this, but I don't see why anyone would have just speculated that this could even happen. However, one person claims they saw it coming, and she is slamming the authorities for failing to protect 7-month-old Bennett. Stephen's ex-wife and Katie's mother, Alyssa, said, quote, "I can understand they like to put children in the hands of relatives. but not Grace. She wouldn't have been able to stop him seeing the baby even if she wanted to. Steve may have found a way to get to him, but they could certainly have made things much more difficult for him. I think they could have helped to prevent some, if not all of this. If anyone is brought up on charges of incest, they should never be allowed near another minor child. They did not consider how sick a mind he had, end quote. And I agree with her. I think that probably a mental health evaluation should have been done on Stephen Pladl before he was, released. I think that Bennett should have been put with somebody else, like a foster family, at least temporarily. I honestly don't see why Bennett couldn't have stayed with Katie, because she's his mother and she wasn't abusive. There's a lot of things that probably could have and should have happened. For me, putting Bennett with Grace was dumb, because we already know, once again, I don't know what hold Stephen has over people, but he gets people to go along with all of this stuff, and it seemed like he kind of wore the pants with his own mother. The fact that he had her come to this wedding, and the fact that she was okay with it, which is weird. And the fact that, he was able to just go and pick up that baby and say, oh, I'm going to see Katie, even though his mother knew that there was a court order that Stephen wasn't allowed to see Katie. And she should have said that and said, Stephen, don't get yourself in more trouble, man. You're already probably facing jail time. Don't get yourself in any more trouble. That's what she should have done, but it didn't look like she really had any power to say no to him, which is probably what Alyssa meant when she said even if Grace had wanted to stop Stephen, she wouldn't have been able to. But also, I want to point out, Alyssa, that, and I feel bad for doing this, but, you could have helped avoid this too, right? If you had reported Stephen Pladl and the abuse he did to Katie when she was a baby, then there would have been stuff on his record to show that he wasn't right. If you reported the abuse that he doled out, verbal and, mental and emotional, to your two younger daughters, if you'd reported that, if you'd left him at that point, if that had all come out in the divorce proceedings, that would have also helped, and then we would have had a pattern of behavior in his history and in his past that the court and the judge and law enforcement could have looked at and said, oh, this guy's not super stable and he has been known to hurt children, so we should make it, at this point while he's awaiting trial, really impossible for him to see his son Bennett, because we don't know what he's capable of. That would have been helpful. So I understand Alyssa and I agree with her, but I also think that there is some responsibility here to be put at her feet. And I'm sure she agrees, and I'm sure she already feels guilty about it, so I don't need to say any more. Alyssa also said that all of Stephen's guns were supposed to have been seized when he was arrested, but she had warned the police that Stephen was an excellent carpenter. Apparently he's a very talented carpenter, and she wouldn't be surprised if he'd crafted some sort of hidden compartment in his North Carolina house to, basically store and hide weapons in. Alyssa even claimed that she warned the police that Stephen was violent and unpredictable, and that she'd been afraid he was going to kill her from the moment she called law enforcement and reported his incestuous relationship with their daughter, Katie. I don't know if that's true, but if she did, I'm glad. And if she did, and if she gave, examples and instances and dates and specifics and details, and the police still were like, oh, that's interesting, but not relevant, then that is a problem with law enforcement in this case. I mean, overall, this is just really sad, because I do think that Katie Pladl was manipulated and brainwashed by Stephen. Not only is there, an age difference, which automatically puts you in an uneven power dynamic, but he was her father. So it's also that weird sort of power dynamic. That's an off power dynamic, it gives a whole new meaning to calling your boyfriend daddy, right? It's there's this very dominant sort of suggestion to that. I'm your daddy and I'm also your husband, and you're going to do what I say. She may have had issues feeling abandoned because she was put up for adoption. She may have felt unwanted, undesired by her parents. So when Stephen desired her, even though it was sexually, it filled a hole in her that had been empty and had been wanting something. And maybe, the lines got crossed in her mind. But I don't think that this is what she really wanted. I think she was navigated and manipulated into this relationship with Stephen. And after her arrest and her release, she was able to get some time and some distance and space between her and Stephen, and the spell was like broken. She may have even woken up from like an almost trance-like state where she'd been too close to the situation to see how messed up it was. And, once her head was clear and Stephen wasn't whispering in her ear every 2 minutes and he wasn't there every second, she snapped out of it. Clearly, in my opinion, Katie had changed her mind because she called Stephen to tell him it was over. I mean, maybe she was going to therapy too. Maybe she was able to get some mental health help, and the mental health professional was like, let me open your mind to why this is not okay. And so she finally like snapped out of it because she told him like, it's over. Now, had that been the end of it and he'd accepted that, it's possible that Katie could have still gone on to live a pretty happy life. Maybe she could have made it to art school, gone to New York City, changed her name, started a whole new life, pursued her career, raised her son, and put Stephen Pladl behind her forever. But he couldn't let that happen. And as Alyssa put it, quote, I knew from the very beginning that I had to get Katie away from him to give her a chance in life. Ultimately, Stephen was just finishing off what he started 20 years earlier, end quote. It's very, very sad because screw Stephen Pladl, honestly. Like, I don't feel bad for him. I'm glad he's gone. I'm glad he's gone. He was action-packed with issues, and he seemed to have a pattern of behavior of preying on young girls, getting them pregnant, and then abusing the children of those young girls. And I think it would have only been a matter of time before he was abusing Bennett if he didn't already. So I'm glad that Stephen Pladl is gone, but Bennett and Katie were the real true victims here. I think she was 100% manipulated into this, and Bennett didn't ask for this, man. Bennett did not ask to be born into this wackadoodle, banana, split sundae with nuts situation. And unfortunately, they paid the price for Stephen's psychopathy because, killing cats, abusing children, the dude's not right. They paid the price for him being not right, and they paid the price for his selfishness. And it's just very sad. But let me know what you guys think about this case in the comments section. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it, share it if you think it's worth sharing, and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the subscribe button right now. I'm going to wait. I don't like begging people to subscribe to me, but I'm begging you. Please, please. And while you're at it, please go over to my wife's Instagram, Ilaria Baldwin, and follow her because she's almost at 1 million, and it would be a really great birthday present for her, even though right now I am facing, like manslaughter charges, and this should be the last thing on my mind. I shouldn't care about Instagram followers at all because I was kind of responsible for taking a life, whether it was accidental or what have you, but, just please do that. I'm sorry. I had to. Yeah, follow me on Instagram and Twitter as well. Okay, I don't have close to 1 million followers on Instagram like Ilaria Baldwin, but I do want to see you guys on Instagram. I think we have a lot of fun over on Instagram. I'm not on Twitter as much, but I don't know. I'm rambling right now. So sorry. Anyways, also follow my podcast Crime Weekly that I co-host every week with retired police detective and former Big Brother winner Derek Levasseur. We cover different true crime cases, we do deep dives, and we even have a new segment called Crime Weekly News where we talk about different crimes that are in the headlines, so more current crimes that are happening, and people really seem to like that. So you can check out Crime Weekly News on YouTube, and our regular Crime Weekly weekly segment is available on YouTube and also wherever you get your audio podcasts. I've linked everything in the description box. I've also linked to the website of my coffee company, well, mine and Derek's, who cares about him? My coffee company, Criminal Coffee Company. It is the best coffee ever. I encourage you guys to try it out. And we just released new merch, which I think is the cutest merch ever. Like, even if you don't drink criminal coffee, I still think that you would think the merch is super cute, because it is. So go check all of that out. Thank you so much for being here. Stay kind, stay beautiful, and stay safe. And I'll see you very, very soon. Bye.
Don't break now, and the bottle's going straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood, blood on the strings, blood, blood on the strings, blood, blood on the strings. Thin plates on my face don't bleed. Got blood, blood on the strings, blood, blood on the strings, blood, blood on the strings. Lord knows it's been a rough week. Channeling my son how